What's up, Pepper Crew? Big Mike here, along with Mama Pepper. Today's episode is not going to be so much of a fun adventure, but an important adventure. In today's adventure, we're going to be following along the trail of a series of events that happened during the Summer of Freedom in 1964. We're here just outside the outskirts of Philadelphia, Mississippi, at Mount Zion United Methodist Church. I don't know how much of this is going to get picked up on audio as I film because there's a lot of wind, but if that happens, I'm going to do voiceover. But just to let y'all know, this is a really important event in the history of the United States that took place. It set off a series of events, and so we're going to be at different locations throughout this adventure. This may look like an ordinary church, but in 1964, the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, were holding meetings here trying to raise awareness on voter education and trying to educate people on how to vote. This was an African-American church in the community, and this is where they would hold the meetings. And as they were leaving the meeting on June 16th, 1964, 3 people were summarily drug out and beaten at the ends of the butts of rifles and shotguns by the KKK. The 3 people beaten were named J.R. Bud Cole, Georgia Rush, and her son, John Thomas. And those events would then lead to this church being burned to the ground. Obviously, this would not be the church that was standing here at the time. But a few days later, 3 gentlemen from the Congress of Racial Equality were driving down here on June 21st to come get sworn affidavits from the 3 people I just mentioned. But they would never make it here. These few days would be several days that would create a spark in this country that would change the nation from that day forward. The gentlemen that were traveling here that day were Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman. They would never get those affidavits. This church would be rebuilt 2 years later, and you can see it as it stands now. It was rebuilt in 1966, and it's still in operation to this day. A beautiful building. Our next stop along this route is what was once the Neshoba County Jail. James Chaney would be arrested for speeding just outside of Philadelphia city limits, heading towards the Methodist church that was burned to the ground. And Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner were brought in also by this deputy sheriff, Cecil Ray Price, to be locked up here for investigational purposes. Chaney, Goodman, and Schwerner would never be granted a phone call to their home. They would never be granted a phone call to an attorney. They would be denied any particular right that they could have received during this time. That this was not an arrest by Cecil Price. This was an arrangement for a murder. During the 12 hours that they would be locked up here, Cecil Ray Price would contact the local KKK leader, Edgar Killen, to arrange the murder of these 3 gentlemen. All right, we are at our 3rd location. This is at the corner, the intersection of County Road 515 and Highway 19. And there's a major reason why this spot is significant. In this spot, after James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were released, This is the spot just outside of Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the KKK would catch up with them, stop them, rip them out of their vehicle, commence to beating James Chaney mercilessly. And after they finished beating James Chaney mercilessly, they would shoot Andrew Goodman once in the chest, they would shoot Michael Schwerner once in the chest, and they would shoot James Chaney 3 times. After they were unalived, the KKK would go hide their bodies in an earthen dam somewhere near here. And their bodies would remain hidden for 44 days. It's something to be noted that Schwerner's widow would say that if her husband and Goodman had not been here that day, that nobody would have ever looked for James Chaney, the African American. And I believe her, because that's the way it was in 1964. But because of national outrage over this incident, the federal government would get involved. And it would take 44 days for them to locate the bodies of these gentlemen. Now, one of the important things that did happen as a result of this event that took place in this very spot was 12 days before their bodies were discovered and everybody knew that they had been murdered, the public outrage was enough that Lyndon Johnson would finally get enough votes to secure the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So, while a great injustice took place here, we recognize that in our nation's history, because of what took place in this very spot, we are a better country for it. We still have 2 more locations to go to, so stick around. We're here on the outskirts, just south of Meridian, Mississippi, at Okeechobee Cemetery, at the grave of James Earl Chaney. James was born on May 30th, 1943, and he grew up in a very different world than what we know. He couldn't drink at white water fountains. He couldn't sit in the same section as white people at the movie theater. He had to go to a segregated school. He couldn't ride on the front of the bus. If you were African American and you tried these things, you could be beaten. You could face consequences that we couldn't even imagine today. He grew up in a segregated school, and he would be suspended at the age of 15 because he dared to wear an NAACP pin on his shirt. The principal, who was also African American, feared the repercussions from the school district that was run by white people if they were allowed to wear those pins, so he felt like he had to suspend James Chaney. But James Chaney's interest in civil rights wouldn't end there. As he graduated high school, and he would end up joining CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and this would lead to these events here. We often have a tendency to look at black and white photos and think that this is something from a long time ago, but this is a very real thing that happened within just a couple of generations. My dad is in his mid-80s, and James Chaney is just a little bit younger than he is. And James Chaney, if he had survived this incident, may have been a grandfather, a great-grandfather, still sitting in his home, entertaining his kids and his grandkids. It wasn't that far in the distant past that this happened. That's why it's important in this day and time, even though if you disagree with somebody, even if you don't agree 100% on things, and even if you vehemently disagree with people, it's still a person that you're dealing with. Dehumanization never leads to anything good. The first step towards anything terrible that happens in our world is to dehumanize the people that you're looking at. And that is exactly what took place here. James Chaney was a human being worthy of dignity, whether you agreed with him or not. And he paid for it with his life. Rest easy, James. I hope the world is a better place because of you. We're at my final stop on Freedom Summer, the Meridian Federal Courthouse, which is now a post office in downtown Meridian. If you're wondering if James Chaney and Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner ever got the justice they deserved, in my opinion, the resounding answer would be no. If you're wondering if they were ever charged with murder, they weren't. The local law enforcement agencies and the district attorneys colluded and said that there was not enough evidence to bring murder charges against those that were accused, which then forced the federal government to step in 1967. Unfortunately, at the time, the federal government did not have murder laws on the books, so they were brought up on civil rights charges, and they were brought to this courthouse to face trial. And each one of the conspirators would eventually be convicted of those civil rights charges, and they would receive sentences anywhere between 3 years and 10 years in prison. 3 years and 10 years isn't much for murders committed, especially with the brutality in which it took place. If it's any consolation, in the year 2005, Edward Ray Killen, the ringleader of the whole shebang, was brought up on charges of murder in the state of Mississippi. He would be tried on 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and he would be found guilty on all 3 counts. He would receive a 60-year prison sentence, which after 41 years of living a free life doesn't seem like much of a sentence, but at least it was some semblance of a little bit of justice. Although justice delayed sometimes doesn't seem like justice at all. As an addendum to all this, there was a great movie that came out in the 80s called Mississippi Burning, and it was Gene Hackman starred in it, and it's a very worthwhile watch. It kind of covers this story, and it's obviously just a dramatized account of it, but definitely a worthwhile watch. If you haven't seen it yet, get out there and watch it. There's no real flashy outro to do with something like this. Just know that I love you. I hope you love everyone around you. Until next time.